Johnny Carson stopped mid-monologue. The microphone lowered. The studio froze. It was April 26, 1989, a Wednesday night. The Tonight Show was in full swing. 13 million Americans were watching from their living rooms. Johnny had just delivered a joke about Congress. The audience was still laughing. Doc Severson's band was ready for the next cue. Ed McMahon was grinning from his seat. Then Johnny looked down at his desk, at a small white envelope that hadn't been there during rehearsal. His smile faded, not gradually, instantly, like someone had flicked a switch inside him. He picked up the envelope, turned it over. No name, no address, just a single word written in shaky handwriting. Please. He looked toward the curtain. Lucille Ball stepped onto the stage. But this wasn't the Lucy America knew. This wasn't the woman who had made a nation laugh for 4 decades. This wasn't the comedic genius who had built an empire. This was someone else entirely. Her red hair was still perfect. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes told a different story. They were tired, heavy, carrying something no amount of stage lighting could hide. Johnny stood. He didn't wait for applause. He walked around the desk and took her hand. The audience started clapping, but he raised his other hand. A gentle gesture. The applause stopped. The band went silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. How did we get here? Let's go back. 6 hours earlier. Burbank, California. NBC Studios, 3:47 p.m. Johnny Carson sat in his dressing room going over the night script. Standard Wednesday show, monologue, comedy sketch, musical guest, then Lucille Ball. It was supposed to be a light interview promoting her new project, sharing behind-the-scenes stories from I Love Lucy. Safe, easy, nostalgic. Fred de Cordova, the show's producer. Johnny, we might have a situation. Johnny looked up. Fred never said situation unless it was serious. Lucy's assistant just called. She wants to change the interview format. She says Lucy has something she needs to say. Something personal. Personal? How? They wouldn't tell me. But the assistant was crying. Johnny set down his cards. He had known Lucy for 30 years. They had shared stages, award shows, charity events. He had watched her build Desilu Productions. He had seen her divorce Desi, navigate scandals, lose friends. But Lucy never brought personal things to his show. That wasn't her style. She kept the mask on always. Does she want to cancel? No. She specifically asked for you. Said it has to be tonight. Said it has to be live. Johnny stood and walked to the window overlooking the studio lot. The sun was setting. Golden light painted the buildings orange. Tell her yes, whatever she needs. Behind the jokes, behind the carefully crafted persona of the king of late night, he was a man who understood that sometimes television wasn't about entertainment. Sometimes it was about bearing witness. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. Now we're back in that moment. Johnny holding Lucy's hand. The audience silent. Millions watching at home. The camera still rolling, because no one had told them to stop. Lucy looked at Johnny. I brought something, she said quietly. Her voice cracked. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a letter. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges. The ink had faded, but you could still see the handwriting. Neat, careful. The handwriting of someone who knew how to write love letters. Desi wrote this to me in 1951, Lucy said. Right before we started filming the pilot for I Love Lucy. We were broke. The network didn't believe in us. Everyone said a Cuban band leader and a redhead from New York couldn't carry a show. She unfolded the letter slowly. Her hands were shaking. Johnny didn't let go. He stood there close enough that she could feel someone was with her, far enough that the camera could see her face. He wrote, Lucy, whatever happens with this show, I want you to know something. You are not just my wife. You are not just my partner. You are the funniest person I have ever met. And even if no one else ever laughs, I will spend the rest of my life laughing with you. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the ventilation system humming. Lucy looked up from the letter. Tears were streaming down her face. The makeup that had taken an hour to apply was ruined. She didn't care. Desi died 6 months ago, she said, and I never told him that this letter saved my life. Not once. Not during the 20 years we were married. Not during the 30 years after we divorced. I kept it in a drawer. I read it every time I doubted myself. Every time I thought about quitting. every time the world felt too heavy. Johnny's jaw tightened. Anyone watching closely could see it. The way he pressed his lips together. The way his eyes got glossy. He had interviewed presidents, movie stars, athletes, world leaders. But this was different. This wasn't an interview. This was confession. This was grief. This was Lucy finally taking off the mask. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Fred Decortiva was in the control room, watching the monitors. His hand was on the commercial break button. Standard protocol said if a guest breaks down, cut to commercial. Protect them, protect the show. But Johnny's voice came through his earpiece. Fred, don't you dare cut away. Johnny, I know what she's doing. Let her do it. On stage, Lucy continued. I built an empire. I ran a studio. I made people laugh for 40 years, but I never learned how to say thank you to the one person who believed in me when no one else did. I never learned how to tell him that his love was the foundation of everything I built. She looked directly into the camera, not at Johnny, not at the audience, at America, at the 13 million people watching from their couches and kitchen tables. If you love someone, tell them. Don't wait. Don't think you'll have time later. Don't assume they know because Desi died thinking I had moved on, thinking our life together was just a chapter 1 had closed. And I will spend the rest of my life knowing. I let him believe that the letter slipped from her hands. It floated down, landed on Johnny's desk. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at Lucy, and then he did something no one expected. He pulled her into a hug. Not a polite Hollywood hug. A real one. The kind you give someone when words have run out. The kind that says, I see you, I hear you, you're not alone. Lucy buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed. 38 years of holding it together came undone in front of millions of strangers. The audience didn't know what to do. Some were crying, some were frozen, but then one person stood up, then another. Then the entire studio was on their feet, not applauding, just standing, bearing witness, holding space for a woman who had spent her entire life making them laugh, finally allowing herself to cry. Doc Severance wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Ed McMahon's face was buried in his hands. The camera operators kept filming because they understood this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was history. But this was the moment no one in the studio nor anyone at home ever saw coming. When Lucy finally pulled back, Johnny reached for the letter on his desk. He picked it up carefully, like it was made of glass, like it might dissolve if he held it too tight. He looked at it, read the words Desi had written 38 years ago. Then he looked at Lucy. Can I keep this? He asked quietly. Lucy blinked, confused. What? This letter. Can I keep it, Johnny? That's the only copy. I know. That's why I'm asking. He stepped closer, lowered his voice so only she could hear, but the microphone still picked it up. Lucy, you think you never said thank you? But you did. Every episode of I Love Lucy was a thank you. Every time you made someone laugh when they were grieving, or scared, or alone, that was you saying thank you to Desi. You didn't waste his belief in you. You turned it into something that will outlive both of you. Lucy covered her mouth with both hands. Fresh tears came, but different ones. Not grief, something else, something lighter. I want to keep this letter, Johnny continued, because I want to put it somewhere safe, somewhere it can remind people of what you just said. That love doesn't end when someone dies, that gratitude doesn't have an expiration date, and that it's never too late to say the things we should have said. He turned to the camera, looked directly into the lens. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want every single person watching this to think about someone they love, someone they haven't thanked, someone they've been taking for granted. And I want you to tell them tonight, before you go to bed. Call them, write them, show up at their door if you have to, because Lucy is right. You don't know how much time you have. He nodded to Fred. The commercial break came, but in the studio, no one moved. Lucy sat down in the guest chair. Johnny sat across from her. The letter was still in his hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The cameras came back. Johnny didn't do the usual post-break banter. He just looked at Lucy and asked softly, "What do you want people to remember about Desi?" And Lucy smiled. For the first time that night, she smiled. Not the Lucy Ricardo smile, not the Hollywood smile, a real one. That he was kind. That he made me feel like I could do anything. and that he loved me even when I didn't know how to love myself. The rest of the interview was gentle, quiet. Johnny asked about the good days, the laughter between takes, the way Desi would make her breakfast on Sundays, the time he surprised her with a trip to Cuba to meet his family. They talked about love, not as a fairy tale, but as something messy and complicated and worth fighting for. When the show ended, Johnny walked Lucy backstage himself. The crew gave them space. In the hallway, under the fluorescent lights, Lucy hugged him again. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You let me be human tonight. That's the greatest gift anyone has given me in 40 years. Johnny smiled, tired, sad, but genuine. "Lucy, you've been making people human for 40 years. Tonight, you just showed them it's okay to hurt. That's not a small thing." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 3 years later, Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show. In his final week, he was asked about his most memorable interview. He didn't mention presidents or movie stars. He mentioned Lucy. He mentioned that letter. He mentioned how television at its best isn't about making people laugh or cry. It's about making them feel less alone. The letter Desi wrote to Lucy is now in a glass frame in the Paley Center for Media in New York. Right next to it is a small placard that reads, "Love is not measured by how long you say it. It's measured by how deeply you live it." Lucille Ball died in 1989, just months after that interview. Some say she had been holding on, waiting for permission to let go, waiting to say the things she needed to say. And Johnny gave her that space. Not as an entertainer, not as the king of late night, but as a human being who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is hold space for someone else's pain. That night changed television. Not in a loud way, not in a way that won awards or broke ratings records, but in a quiet way. It reminded an entire generation that the people they watched on screen were not invincible, that comedy was often a mask for grief, that laughter and tears were not opposites, they were neighbors. Johnny never spoke publicly about what Lucy told him during the commercial break. He kept that conversation private, sacred. But those who were there said he cried, the kind of crying you do when you realize that life is short and love is fragile, and the only thing that matters is connection. And that letter, the one Desi wrote in 1951, it's still there in the Paley Center behind glass. Thousands of people visited every year. They read those words. They think about the people they love. They think about the things they haven't said. And sometimes right there in the museum, they pull out their phones and call someone, tell them, thank them, love them out loud. Because Lucy was right. You don't know how much time you have. And Johnny understood that the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to be seen, to be heard, to be human. That night, 13 million people watched Lucille Ball cry on national television. But what they really watched was something much rarer. They watched two people who had spent their entire lives performing finally stop, finally breathe, finally tell the truth. And in that moment, television wasn't a screen anymore, it was a mirror. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson ended in 1992. Lucille Ball had been gone for 3 years by then, but that interview lived on. It was replayed, studied, referenced because it proved something essential about the medium. That television at its core is not about entertainment. It's about witness. It's about holding up a mirror to humanity and saying, you are not alone in this. Johnny Carson died in 2005. When they went through his personal effects, they found a photocopy of Desi's letter in his desk drawer, folded carefully, worn at the edges from being opened and read many times. On the back, in Johnny's handwriting, were just 3 words. She finally said it. That night in 1989, television stopped being a show. It became a confession, a mirror, a moment when 2 legends took off their masks and reminded the world that underneath the laughter, we're all just people trying to love each other before time runs out.